search for light. In confusion, we seek for answers. But sometimes, to find what we're looking for, all we need is just a little perspective. You're listening to Point of View, where crucial questions about critical issues are answered from a biblical worldview. And now, here's your host, Josh Barnes.
That's right, this is Josh Barnes, and you are listening to Point of View, and we are dealing with what some have said is one of the most crucial issues of our time. This is like the this is the big thing. This is everything. This is the end of the world as we know it. It is climate change. And when I was younger, early 2000s, it was pretty much it was just pretty much rejected among Christianity. I didn't know any Christians at that time who felt like climate change was real or any of this had any sort of substance to it. But today, 2021, there's a growing number of Christians who are actually asking this question: is climate change actually happening? And how do we view this if it is? How do we deal with this from a Christian perspective? And what's the actual facts behind it? Because as much as it doesn't seem like it is. Just to be honest, as a layperson, as not a science guy, it just feels like there's not anything there. I'm looking outside and it's freezing cold. This is one of the coldest New Hampshire's winters we've had since I've lived in New Hampshire. But yet it's warming, and then in the summer it gets warmer, and that's because of global warming, and none of it really resonates with me personally. However, I don't want to make my decision based on what just resonates with me. I'm seeing climate change being used by the left to advance a leftist agenda, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong just because they're using it in a wrong way. So I really do want to find the solid answer here, and maybe there isn't one, but we've been discussing it for the first hour. Now we have on the phone a very special guest, Dr. Alan White from Answers in Genesis. He is part of the research team that's behind the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter in Kentucky. By the way, my family and I went and saw the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum this last summer, and it was absolutely superb. One of my favorite. I've been to lots of museums and lots of places all over, but this was just absolutely stunning. And Dr. Alan White, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
You're welcome, Josh. My pleasure to be here.
And just so that you know, we have a little bit of a panel discussion. It'll be myself, Justin Barnes, and then Matt Devers. All three of us have been sort of discussing this issue from a Christian perspective. We've done some research, we've got some science facts, but none of us are PhDs in the science community, and so we really, really appreciate you coming on, and we're hoping to get some good answers. You've written several papers on this, and one of the most recent ones I've got here in front of me on answersingenesis.org where's the name of that? I've got it here somewhere. Anyway, it's called Climate Change. Here it is. Climate Change Facts. Should we be concerned? Can you summarize the answer to that question for us? Should we be concerned? I guess I have a couple questions, but the first one is the climate really warming, and is it doing so in a way that concerns you? Are we heading for something catastrophic?
That's a good question, and one that everybody gets confused about. One thing I'd say right away, Josh, is that the climate has been warming for the last 400 years, roughly. There was, historically we know that because there was a little ice age that was around 300 or 400 years ago. And there was a lot of historical evidence that the Earth, or particularly the northern hemisphere, was significantly colder than it is today. And so now we don't see things like the Thames River in London freezing over like it did then. But even before that, the trouble is we have good satellite data of temperatures only for the past 40 years. And we have only land-based measurements only back 180 years. And so, when people talk about it before then, we're all speculating as to what it would be before then. But it's pretty clear that the temperature has been rising for the past roughly 400 years. But is it a problem? I'm not nearly as concerned as a number of people are, as you said, particularly those on the left, because we do have some historical data that says that the Vikings actually came to Greenland and were able to farm in Greenland about 1,000 years ago. And then soon after that, they had to go back because it got cold again and was moving into a little ice age. But so that's what gives me some, perspective. That's often what the news media don't do, is give us perspective. And for looking at it from the perspective of maybe 1,000 years ago, the temperature was about what it is today, may even be a little cooler than it was in the middle of that period. So I guess what I'd say is, yes, is the temperature rising? Yes, it has been for 400 years. Am I concerned because we're out of the range of where we've been before? No, not really. And that is speculative to know exactly what the temperature was back then. But even the historical data we have is indicative that the temperature was about where we are today, maybe even a little warmer, about 1,000 years ago.
So basically, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying from what we can record over the last 40 or the last 180 years, we are warming from 40 years ago or 180 years ago.
Yes, but not very much, but we are warming over that time frame, yes.
And that's another question that I have, is that in some of these models, if you see the picture that they show, it looks like we've only, in the last 40 years or so, changed, the temperature's only changed by about 1 degree globally.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I find that hard to believe that, all of these glaciers are melting with 1 degree change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard from a viewpoint of that and saying what difference does 1 degree make? Well, 1 degree does make a bit of a difference, but the climatologists are not so worried about 1 degree. They're worried about 2, 3, and 4 degrees, which is what they think is coming in the future. And so, yeah, I agree with you. 1 degree doesn't sound like much. It does change some things, believe it or not, but 1 degree shouldn't be going to put us into a panic, though. I agree.
So, Matt, if you could jump in here, you mentioned earlier in our discussion that you'd read a statistic, something like 95% of glaciers were melted. Can you ask Dr. White something about that? I know you had mentioned something about the glaciers.
Right. Well, we were talking more about the potential human impacts of the Earth warming, and the research I'm getting is from a physicist and climate scientist. His name is Joseph Fromm, from a book he wrote, Climate Change: What You Need to Know. And he obviously supports the model of catastrophic global warming in 100 years. But the human impacts, I think, are important. And he says that, in essence, because glaciers are melting and the Earth is warming, there will be less fresh water sources for people and for crops. And what do you think the impacts of those types of things will be in the future?
That's an interesting comment. I don't think I've ever heard that one before. I mean, as the temperature of the Earth rises, of course, there's going to be less ice in the northern Atlantic, certainly, and we see that going up and down now. But there are historical accounts that there was no ice in the North Atlantic back when the Vikings went to Greenland, and so And so that would be a situation early. But I'm not sure how you lose fresh water. You're actually melting more ice, so I guess I'm confused as to why there would be less fresh water. But I would say that one thing I would comment though is that what the main disagreement is now is what is the cause of the global warming. Not as most even creation scientists and secular scientists pretty much agree that the temperature is rising or has been for around 400 years. But the main point of disagreement is what is the cause of that. And the folks on the left believe that it's related to carbon dioxide and the carbon dioxide that people are generating through the burning of fossil fuels. Whereas I've looked at that CO2, the carbon dioxide data, and I don't see a clear correlation like they do to that. And so that is one of the main disagreements at this point, though.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, is if it is warming, right, how can we be there? Because my understanding, and I'm not a climatologist, but my understanding is there's quite a bit of different factors that affect our temperature. How can we be sure that this even is carbon dioxide, let alone that it's man-made carbon dioxide that's causing the warming?
That's a great point, and that's one that I think most people are stuck on is how could that be the case? But let me back up and just say that just think about it for a minute. We get weather predictions every day on the news. You all probably put one out, I'm sure you do. And those predictions are fairly good for 24 to 48 hours, right? But beyond that, that gets less good, and that's trying to predict weather in the near future in a narrow area of the Earth. And what the climatologists are trying to do is understand the climate over the entire Earth, and even be able to predict that into the future. And so what they're trying to do, when I was a little boy, the weather forecasts weren't worth much at all. Roughly 60 years ago. But now the weather predictions are much better. And so climatologists have made significant strides in that trying to improve that. But I just say, and I'm not trying to throw off on the climatologists, they're doing a good job. It's just that this is such a difficult problem that I think it's going to be a long time before we have a climate model that would actually even come close to predicting the future in terms of the weather.
Well, I've got a few more questions, but I wanted to give just a pause here and let Justin or Matt jump in if you have a question for Dr. White before I go on with my list, because I've got a whole list of them.
Okay.
Justin, I think you might be muted there. Can you unmute yourself?
How about now?
There we go. I can hear you now.
There we go. I actually did want to jump in because one of the things we were talking about in the first hour was about the amount of things that get blamed on global warming, the wildfires in California, and one of the statements I had made was that it's in some limited sense, it does seem to make sense that if you have a hotter, drier climate, that it would make sense that you would have greater fires and things like that. Do you think that there are some effects that we see currently like that, or do you think those are completely unrelated instances that are just being used for political gain?
Good question. My answer at this point would be that we don't know. And that when people claim on these rare events, like the hurricanes, we have the most information on hurricanes in the Atlantic and how often do they make landfall in the United States, and how much damage do they do? And if you're trying to predict a rare event like that, it is very difficult to say whether something like the climate affected it or not. And that's been one of the ones that people have pointed to the most. But now the scientists have done about 100-year study of the climate versus the amount of hurricanes around the United States. And what they found is that there's no correlation between the climate and the number of hurricanes. You may recall that in 2005, I believe, when there was, I think, 3 hurricanes made landfall in the United States of a Category 3 or above in 2005, I believe it was. And then everybody was panicked about, what's going to happen in the future, And then it was, I think, almost 15 years before we had another Category 3 or above hurricane hit the landfall in the United States. And so when you're looking at rare events like that, it is very difficult without a lot of data to know whether cause and effect, whether one is the cause of the other or not. And that's the difficult thing in science, is to try to figure out cause and effect, because just because something goes along with something else for a period of time doesn't mean that one is the cause of the other.
Yeah, so correlation doesn't equal causation, right?
Right, that's correct.
And that's something I've found as I've been reading. I guess you've acknowledged here that the temperature is increasing. Do you think that there will be negative effects? And if so, is there some cause for us to try to fix it? And then I guess the follow-up question will eventually be, what can we do to fix it if there is?
Right. Yeah, let me start with that one. At this point, many of the scientists, many of the climatologists believe that carbon dioxide is the main culprit. And they would believe that if we do our best to change the carbon dioxide concentration, that it would affect the temperature. Based on my look at the data, that's not going to work, at least except maybe to a small extent. And so if that doesn't work, what will we do? And the answer, I think the honest answer is we don't know. I think, there'll be a lot of pressure. There will be a lot of pressure, I think, over the next few years, particularly because of the change in the White House to do something about carbon dioxide. And so that's going to be on the agenda of things to do, I think. But I'm pretty skeptical as to whether that's going to work or not. And so, and what was your original question? I forgot.
The original question is, do you think there will be some negative effects, and what do you think we might see from that warming?
Yeah, that's a good question. The effects that people talk about all the time are a rising sea level. And right now, the sea level is rising about 1/8 of 1 inch per year. And so, that's not a dramatic effect. And if you look out through history, the sea level has been a lot lower than it is today. And so an 1/8 of an inch a year doesn't seem dramatic to me. People are talking about what's the effect of temperature going to be on human life, and of course, as you know, if we went down that CO2 route and decided to try to slow that down, energy would cost us a lot more. And of course, the people that are going to be hurt the most by a higher energy costs are the ones with the least amount of money. And so, I think that's probably where an effect would be if there is actually, warming that's a problem. The problem is, to answer your question as to what are the consequences going to be. I mean, everybody in the world is going to be a little warmer. I remember I was going to Canada. I was to give some of these talks that I give, and I gave them a bunch of subjects, and I was surprised that none of them picked global warming. And he says, "Well, we're all up here hoping that it will," and so it depends on where you are, what you want, what you think the effect ought to be. And I've given the climate, the global warming kind of talk in Peru, and I asked them. I said, "Well, who do you think ought to be able to decide what the temperature is going to be?" And they said, "Well, of course, Peru." And of course, every country is going to say the same thing. And so this would be if this was a real problem, this is going to be a real difficult thing to solve, because to get the people around the world to agree on this would be, I think, incredibly difficult. And particularly India and China, who are the ones with the most people, are going to make a lot of effect there. So I think we're going to see the political problems just get incredibly larger if this finally turns out to be a real problem.
That's interesting. I had never really thought about the idea that global warming could actually be very beneficial depending on where you are in the world, and it might actually make some places very pleasant.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And so, and it'll make some places even more unpleasant. I mean, like the desert climates and very, very warm places already. And so, but yeah, it depends on where you are. And it depends on, most people would say, I think, that warmer weather has less of a dramatic effect than significantly colder weather. So, again, it's it's going to be a challenge because everybody's going to want to control the Earth's temperature just like they control the temperature of their own homes here in the United States. So.
And I would like to see if you wouldn't mind addressing the this concept, more of a theological and philosophical stance on climate change, because we know from the Bible, right? We know how the Earth began. We know how it will end. But there's an argument. There's two arguments that I hear from Christians. One is that God would never give humans the ability to destroy the Earth. The other argument is that we're supposed to be tending and keeping the Earth, having dominion over it. We're supposed to be the ones who are keeping it from being destroyed. What is your view on it, just from a theological and more of a philosophical stance, as far as the idea that we should be taking care of the Earth and that maybe we should address some of these climate change issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, as you know, the Bible says that God created the world very good, and that man's sin changed that dramatically, both for man and for the Earth. But He gave us a responsibility, to be fruitful and multiply, and then have dominion over the Earth. And so I think we ought to take that seriously, and I think we ought to be willing as Christians, and maybe even the first in line, to try to do something to help the climate and the Earth if we know how to do that, and if we're sure that we have a problem. But as we do that, I think we need to, as we move in that direction, if it becomes necessary, I think we're going to have a discussion about, well, what solution are we going to try, and what unintended effects is that going to have? And so, has God given us the ability to destroy the Earth? I don't know. I don't. Well, I mean, you could say in a nuclear sense, maybe so, but He's given us a responsibility to take care of it, along with Him. I mean, obviously, there's some things that man can do, and there's some things that only God can do. And so those, to me, we ought to be able to do. I mean, He's given us kind of, we're working together in a sense with God to take care of the Earth, because there's so many things that we're just not capable of. And so to me, I think we ought to be leading the world in that sense, in trying to take care of the Earth, and to do what we can to do that, and to not abuse it. But in this case, I'm just not convinced that the CO2 concentration has a dramatic effect. At least not enough that we should be doing dramatic things here to change it. I may change my mind on that in another 20 or 30 years. I don't know if we see more data. But at this point, I don't see enough clear data to say that carbon dioxide is the major cause of the global warming.
Well, I think that's so helpful, really, because that's sort of what we've been, talking about for the last hour before you came on the show. Is we're not really as well acquainted with the data as you are, and we want to be fair, if that's what the data supports. But again, it does boil down to just being evidentiary in our beliefs. Here's before you go, I wanted to get this in. I am just so impressed by the Creation Museum, the Ark Encounter, Answers in Genesis. It's just been so helpful to me. Every time I have a question about anything science related or anything in Genesis, I'm going to pull it up and see what Answers in Genesis has to say about it. What do you do for them, and what do you think? Maybe give us just a little promo why people should check out the Creation Museum and those resources.
Oh, great! I think I'm just like you. I think that absolutely people should go. The Creation Museum, and particularly the Ark, is such a spectacle. But to me, it's great for Christians. It's also great for those that are seeking, because you find an incredible amount of information there. Those two exhibits really help people to see what a biblical worldview is. In other words, how does God look at this world? And how should we? I've just enjoyed it, being able to work with some of the folks there with Answers in Genesis. I'm more of a contractor. I work with them. I don't work directly for them. In a sense, I'm not a full-time employee. But I've spoken at the Ark many times there, and it's just incredible evidence of how what the Bible says fits with what we see in this world fits incredibly well with what the Bible says. And to me, that's just the kind of evidence that I hope people are willing to see, because to me that's just incredibly important thing for people to recognize, because this world and the secular scientists are going to be totally opposed to this because of that, and certainly opposed to whatever that I would say about it. But to me, I just challenge people to read the Bible, see what it says, and then look at this world and see how well it fits. And the Answers in Genesis folks, like I said, are able. The website is great; it'll answer a bunch of your questions, and but it's nothing's like visiting. And I'd encourage everybody to, as they get a chance, to visit both the Creation Museum and the Ark.
Yeah, so good. And Dr. White, when's the next time you're going to be speaking up in New Hampshire?
In New Hampshire, I don't think I've been in New Hampshire yet speaking.
We'll have to change that. We'll have to get you up here sometime.
Oh, that'd be great. I'd love to come.
Yeah, let us know next time you're out this way. If you're anywhere near, we'll come by and we'll want to see maybe have you on the show again sometime. Been so insightful, so helpful, and exactly what we needed to as we're having this discussion. Thank you so much, Dr. White. We'll be praying for you and your ministry.
Well, thank you. Same to you. Right. It's been my pleasure.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll have you on again sometime. And guys, I wanted to kind of throw it back to you and kind of get your summary. What you think about that call? For those of you watching. I've got to kind of adjust the camera so you're going to see things moving around. It's not aliens. This is me doing this on purpose. But what do you think, Matt and Justin, about that? A lot of that seemed to go right along with what we were kind of concluding ourselves in the last hour. But I thought it was really a fascinating discussion. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought it was good. He agrees, for example, like that the Earth is warming, but it's kind of like where at least I was in that. What are the human causes of it? And then, obviously, I think we all agree that the solutions currently being the solutions that are being proposed are unreasonable and unrealistic, or they cost too much, and those types of things.
Yeah, and I mean, if a solution needs, I loved what he said, because he said, we should be all on board with any solutions, as long as those solutions, there's actually reason to believe that they'll actually do anything and actually help. The solutions that we're presenting now aren't really, according to him, don't seem to be based on actual data. We don't know that this is warming for sure as a result of carbon dioxide, or that these solutions are actually going to limit the carbon dioxide. Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, I really appreciated the balance that he had, because one of the things that you'll find a lot of times with people who question like global warming, or at least the policies being pushed forward to promote the green agenda, a lot of times what you'll see is an attributing motive to the other side. And what I like is that he really didn't do that. He wasn't coming on here and saying all these client scientists are just politically motivated. They have this agenda, this, that, and the other, which is what I hear a lot of even Christian people say. I was glad that he was able to come on and focus on, hey, we ought to be people of the truth. And what I can tell you right now is that I'm just not convinced that the data supports what people are trying to push right now. So I really appreciated the balance in that. And I think it's funny that with a lot less information than he had, I think our questions are still mostly the same. How much is man contributing to this, and what can be done if it becomes a big problem? I mean, we're all asking the same questions still.
Yeah. Now, I do want to encourage everybody to go to answersingenesis.org. Literally, when I have a question, and I actually have, a lot of people don't know this, but I have another YouTube channel that's actually a lot bigger than the Point of View YouTube channel, and that is the Bible Explained. And we deal with a lot of questions about the Bible. How does this work? All these things. But a lot of times when I'm dealing with a question out of Genesis, I'm gonna do a Google search for that question, and then the word answers, the phrase answers in Genesis, because I know it'll bring up their resources. Matt, you went with me when we went to the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum. What was your impression of that and that ministry there?
I had been to the Creation Museum previously, but the moment when you come up over the hill and you see the Ark was just incredible. And the displays and everything in the Ark, it was mind-blowing. And I would encourage anybody, if they could go see the Ark, it was truly amazing.
Yeah, and Justin, you've been to the Creation Museum as well, right?
Twice, actually, yeah.
What I love about that ministry is the biblical worldview. A lot of what they're doing is exactly what we do here on the show. The ministry is just one giant apologetic. This entire explanation for the Bible, and when we say apologetic, we're not apologizing for the Bible, we're defending it, right? And the whole thing is a defense of the Bible. I think that's so effective, so helpful, and I think that even Christians who are who believe in theistic evolution or something like that would get a lot of benefit from going and visiting these attractions. So helpful.